The janitor burst into our classroom, begging for help. No one believed him, but I knew he was innocent. Mr. Torres burst into our class, slamming the door behind him and turning the lock. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with tears, and there was something dark under his fingernails that looked like dried blood. "You all have to believe me, I'm being framed." He was shaking, pressing his back against the door. "The guidance counselor kidnapped my wife. She's seen him following her home. Believe me, I didn't do anything. Please help me find her." Everyone froze. Mrs. Smithon dropped her marker. Someone's phone clattered to the floor. "Mr. Torres, you need to..." "She's been missing for 2 days. The police think I did it, but it's Mr. Landrum. He's obsessed with her. They found blood in my house, but I swear it's not what they think." The door exploded inward. 5 cops rushed in, their guns drawn. Mr. Torres dropped to his knees, hands up, sobbing. They cuffed him roughly while he kept screaming about Mr. Landrum. "There's so much blood at his house, but no body," he cried as they dragged him. "He planted it. Check his office. Check his car." "Is everyone okay?" an officer asked after they'd taken him. "That man is mentally unstable. His wife left him. A week later, we found significant amounts of her blood in their kitchen. Her body is still missing. He's having a breakdown because he knows we're closing in." The officer lowered his voice. "Between you and me, it's always the husband. Classic case, kills her, hides the body, claims innocence. But something felt wrong. Mr. Torres had been our janitor for 3 years, always helped kids with broken lockers, never took sick days, brought his wife Rosa homemade lunch every Friday when she volunteered at the library. Last week, I'd seen them laughing together by his supply closet, her playfully stealing his keys. After class, everyone was talking about Crazy Torres the killer, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I'd seen Mr. Landrum, our guidance counselor, watching Rosa at school events. The way he'd lean too close when talking to her. How he always volunteered to walk her to her car. "That was terrifying," a voice said behind me. Janice Benning, quiet girl from my class, looked nervous. "But what if he wasn't lying? You believe him?" She glanced around, then pulled me aside. "Mr. Landrum keeps asking to meet my mom. Like, constantly. Says we need to discuss my college prospects, but I have straight A's. And he always asks what time she gets home from work. Last week, he showed up at her yoga class by coincidence." My skin crawled. "We should tell someone." "Tell them what? The beloved guidance counselor who won Teacher of the Year is creepy? After a janitor with his wife's blood all over his house just had a mental breakdown? They found blood on his tools, his clothes. The news is already calling him the janitor killer." She was right. We looked crazy, but Mr. Torres' desperation had been real. The way he'd said planted, like he'd walked into his own house and found a crime scene. "Come to my house after school," I said. "We can look into this." Janice looked scared but nodded. "My mom's supposed to meet with Mr. Landrum tomorrow, and I'm canceling it." At my house, we searched online for any news about Rosa Torres. Nothing before today. No missing person report filed until this morning. No social media activity for 3 days. If she left him, wouldn't she update Facebook? Tell her sister? Janice asked. Her last post was about making tamales for the school fundraiser. The news had already picked up the story. School janitor arrested after wife's blood found throughout home. The article mentioned the amount of blood suggested severe injury or death, but no body had been found. Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. We found Mr. Landrum's social media. Clean, professional, lots of photos with students at college fairs. Then Janice gasped. "Look at his photos from last year's spring carnival. In the background of 5 different pictures, Rosa Torres, always in frame, always unaware she was being photographed. 1 from the bake sale, 1 from the dunk tank, 3 from the parking lot as she was leaving. That's stalking," Janice whispered. "He was following her." I found more. Every school event for 2 years. Rosa in the background, a reflection of his sunglasses, a pattern of obsession. "We need to tell..." A tire screech outside cut me off, a car peeling away. I ran to the window but only caught taillights disappearing around the corner. "Check your doorbell cam," Janice said, her voice shaking. I pulled up the app on my phone, a sedan speeding away. The license plate barely visible, but I screenshot it, enhanced it. We used a reverse lookup site my cousin had shown me when he was checking out a sketchy buyer for his car. The name that came up made my blood run cold. "Rosa Torres," Janice read. That's the janitor's wife's car." "So she's alive? She's driving around? Or someone's using her car?" I grabbed my keys and we ran outside to my car, both of us needing to move, to do something instead of just standing there staring at that screenshot. We sat in the front seats for what felt like forever, maybe 20 minutes, just staring at my phone screen showing Rosa's license plate. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Janice kept looking over her shoulder at the empty street like the car might come back. We both knew what finding her car here meant. Either Rosa was alive and watching us for some reason, or someone else had her car and knew we were investigating. Neither option felt good. I kept opening my mouth to say we should call the police, then closing it again because what would we even tell them? 2 high school kids saw a car drive away fast? They'd think we were pranking them or making stuff up for attention. Janice finally broke the silence and said we had to try anyway, that we couldn't just sit here doing nothing. I pulled up the non-emergency number on my phone and pressed call before I could chicken out. The dispatcher who answered sounded bored, like she was filing her nails or something. I explained that I'd seen Rosa Torres's car outside my house, and it sped away when we noticed it. She asked if I was sure it wasn't just a similar vehicle, her tone suggesting she thought I was wasting her time. I told her about the license plate lookup and how we had screenshots and doorbell cam footage. She made this sighing sound and said an officer would swing by when available, like I'd called about a noise complaint instead of a missing woman's car. I hung up feeling sick to my stomach. Janice looked at me and said what we were both thinking. We couldn't wait for adults who didn't take us seriously. We needed to document everything ourselves before more evidence disappeared or got destroyed. We went back inside and spent the next hour at my kitchen table, creating a detailed timeline of everything we knew. I wrote it all out by hand on notebook paper, while Janice pulled up stuff on her phone to verify dates and times. We started with Mr. Torres's breakdown in class, him screaming about being framed and Mr. Landrum planting evidence. Then Rosa's disappearance 2 days before that, the blood found in their house, Mr. Torres's arrest. We added every observation about Mr. Landrum watching Rosa at the school events, the social media photos with her in the background, his pattern of showing up wherever she was. We included the license plate lookup showing Rosa's car outside my house tonight. Janice suggested we make copies and hide them in different locations in case something happened to the original evidence. At first I thought she was being paranoid, but then I remembered someone in Rosa's car now knew we were investigating. Someone knew where I lived. We made 3 copies on my printer, and I gave one to Janice to hide at her house. I put one in my backpack and hid the other in my closet behind some old shoeboxes. That night I barely slept. Every sound outside my window made me jump. A dog barking 3 houses down, a car door slamming somewhere on the block, the wind rattling my window screen. I kept my phone next to my pillow, checking the doorbell cam footage over and over like I was obsessed. Around 2 in the morning I saw something that made my heart start pounding. A car slowly cruised past my house with its headlights off. It was too dark to identify the make or model, just a dark shape moving slower than normal traffic. It paused in front of my house for maybe 5 seconds, then kept going. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely hold my phone steady enough to screenshot the footage. The image was grainy and dark, but I saved it anyway, adding it to our evidence folder. I didn't sleep at all after that, just lay there staring at my ceiling and listening for car engines. At the school the next morning, everyone was still talking about Crazy Torres and where he hid Rosa's body. I walked past a group of seniors near my locker and heard one of them say, "Mr. Torres probably fed her through a wood chipper." Another one laughed and said, "Maybe he dissolved her in acid like on that crime show." I had to walk away before I said something that would out my investigation. My whole body felt tense and angry. These people were making jokes about a woman who might still be alive, about a man who might be innocent. I made it through first period barely paying attention to anything the teacher said. During the break before second period, my phone buzzed with a text from Janice. She said she found something important and to meet her in the library during lunch. The library was mostly empty when I got there, just a few kids studying in the corner and the librarian at her desk. Janice was waiting at a table in the back near the windows. She had her laptop open and gestured for me to sit down fast. She showed me Mr. Landrum's class schedule that she'd pulled from the school website. His free periods were 2nd, 5th, and 7th. Rosa volunteered at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays during 2nd and 5th period. The alignment was perfect. He had regular access to her without it seeming suspicious at all. He could just walk in during his free time, claim he was checking on something, and be near Rosa whenever he wanted. Lorelei, the librarian, noticed us whispering and looking intense. She walked over and asked if everything was okay, her expression more concerned than nosy. She was younger than most teachers, maybe late 20s, and Rosa had always talked about how nice she was. I made a quick decision to trust Lorelei because she worked with Rosa every week and might have noticed things we couldn't know about. I asked carefully if she ever saw Mr. Landrum around when Rosa was volunteering. Her face went completely pale. She glanced toward the hallway where you could see Mr. Landrum's office down the hall through the library windows. She leaned in close and told us quietly to come to her office after school when fewer people were around. Then she walked back to her desk like nothing happened, but I saw her hands were shaking a little when she picked up her coffee mug. The rest of the school day dragged by so slowly I thought I might scream. I watched Mr. Landrum in the hallways between classes, smiling and chatting with students like he was everyone's favorite counselor. He high-fived a freshman. He complimented a girl's art project she was carrying. He looked so normal and friendly. Then he stopped me between 3rd and 4th period, right in the middle of the crowded hallway. He asked how I was handling the traumatic incident with Mr. Torres bursting into our class. His concern seemed totally genuine, his voice all soft and understanding. But then I noticed how his eyes kept scanning the hallway like he was looking for someone specific. I mumbled something about being fine and escaped to my next class, my skin crawling. He'd never talked to me before. Why was he suddenly checking on me? After school, Janice and I met Lorelei in her small office behind the library stacks. It was cramped, barely bigger than a closet, with shelves of books and a tiny desk covered in papers. Lorelei closed the door and locked it, which made my stomach drop. She told us she'd been worried about Rosa for months because Mr. Landrum would always find excuses to be in the library during Rosa's volunteer shifts. She described how he'd lean too close when talking to Rosa, invading her personal space. How he'd offer to walk her to her car, even when Rosa clearly didn't want company and would make excuses. How Rosa started looking uncomfortable whenever he appeared, her shoulders getting tense and her smile becoming forced. Lorelei said she almost said something to Rosa directly, but worried she was overreacting or being too protective. Lorelei pulled out her phone and swiped through her photos until she found what she was looking for. She showed us pictures she'd taken of the library's sign-in sheet from the past 6 months. Mr. Landrum had signed in during Rosa's shifts at least 30 times, always claiming he was checking on student resources or coordinating college visits. But Lorelei said those reasons never made sense because he never actually did anything with resources or talked to students about college while he was there. He just wandered around, always ending up near wherever Rosa was working. Lorelei said she almost reported it to the principal, but worried she was overreacting since Mr. Landrum was so well-liked and she was just the librarian. Her voice cracked a little when she said that last part, like she felt guilty for not speaking up sooner. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder with all the screenshots we'd saved. My hands were a little shaky as I turned the screen toward Lorelei and started swiping through the photos from Mr. Landrum's social media. She leaned forward, squinting at the first image from last year's spring carnival. Her finger touched the screen where Rosa stood in the background near the bake sale table, completely unaware she was photographed. Lorelei's face went pale and she grabbed my phone, zooming in on the image. She swiped to the next photo and gasped out loud. She knew this one. She remembered the exact day because it was the library fundraiser, and Rosa had been helping her set up the book sale tables. Lorelei said she'd seen Mr. Landrum standing near the entrance with his phone out, angling it in this weird way that seemed off at the time. She thought he was just taking pictures of the event for the school website like he always did. But now, looking at the photo, Rosa was perfectly centered in the frame, while the actual fundraiser was barely visible. Lorelei swiped through more photos and kept pointing out dates she recognized. The fall festival where Rosa volunteered at the face painting booth, the winter concert where Rosa helped hand out programs, the teacher appreciation lunch where Rosa brought her famous tamales. Every single photo had Rosa somewhere in the frame, and Lorelei remembered Mr. Landrum being there with his phone, always positioning himself to get Rosa in his shots. She set my phone down on her desk and covered her mouth with her hand. She said she felt sick because she'd watched him do this for 2 years and never put it together. She grabbed a notepad from her desk drawer and started writing everything down. The dates she remembered seeing him, the times he'd show up during Rosa's volunteer shifts, the way he'd always find excuses to walk past wherever Rosa was working. She wrote for several minutes, filling up 2 full pages with details. When she finished, she looked up at me and Janice with tears in her eyes. She said we needed to take this to someone outside the school because the administration would probably try to protect Mr. Landrum. He'd won Teacher of the Year twice and the principal loved him. If we went to the school with this evidence, they might just bury it to avoid bad publicity. Janice shifted in her chair and said, maybe we should contact a reporter. The news had been covering Mr. Torres's arrest nonstop, and a journalist might be interested in hearing a different side of the story. My stomach dropped at the idea of going public. That felt huge and scary and way beyond what 2 high school students should be doing. But Lorelei nodded and said Janice was right. She pointed out that the longer we waited, the more time Mr. Landrum had to destroy evidence or cover his tracks. Mr. Torres was sitting in jail right now for something he didn't do, and every day that passed made it harder to help him. She pulled up the local news website on her computer and scrolled through the articles about the case. Most of them were pretty one-sided, basically calling Mr. Torres guilty without actually saying it. But one article stood out because it mentioned that no body had been found and quoted a lawyer saying the evidence was circumstantial. The reporter's name at the top was Kai Coleman. Lorelei said this guy seemed more careful and balanced than the others. She wrote down his email address from the contact information at the bottom of the article. She handed me the paper with his email and told us to be careful about what we said and how we said it. We needed to sound like we had real information, not like conspiracy theorists or kids making things up. She also made us promise to keep her name out of it for now, because she couldn't afford to lose her job if the school found out she was helping us. That evening, I sat at my desk staring at a blank email for almost an hour. I must have started and deleted the message 10 times before I finally got something that sounded right. I explained that we were students at the school, and we had information about Rosa Torres's disappearance that didn't match what the police were saying. I tried to keep it short and factual without sounding dramatic. I attached the screenshots of Mr. Landrum's social media photos with Rosa in the background. I attached the image of the license plate from my doorbell cam. I attached a document with the timeline we'd put together showing Mr. Landrum's access to Rosa during her volunteer shifts. Before I hit send, I read the whole email 5 times. I changed a few words to make sure I sounded older and more serious. I didn't want him to dismiss us just because we were high school students. My finger hovered over the send button for a solid minute before I finally clicked it. The whoosh sound as the email sent made my heart race. I closed my laptop and tried to do homework, but I couldn't focus on anything except wondering if Kai would even read the email or if he'd just delete it as spam. My phone buzzed less than an hour later with a new email notification. I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it. Kai had responded already, which shocked me because I figured journalists were busy people who took days to answer emails. He said he'd been following the Torres case closely and had noticed some things about the investigation that didn't quite add up. He said our information was interesting, but he needed more than anonymous tips to pursue an alternate angle. He asked if we could meet in person at a coffee shop tomorrow afternoon so he could ask us some questions and verify our evidence. He promised to keep our identities confidential if we wanted. I read the email 3 times, feeling this weird mix of excitement and terror. An actual journalist thought our evidence was worth investigating. That meant we weren't crazy. But it also meant we were really doing this, really going up against Mr. Landrum and potentially the whole police investigation. I texted Janice the news and she responded immediately saying we should meet him. I emailed Kai back, agreeing to meet at 3:30 the next day at the coffee shop he suggested. The next day at the school felt endless. I kept watching the clock during every class, counting down the hours until we'd meet Kai. During lunch, I grabbed my tray and headed toward my usual table near the windows. That's when I noticed Mr. Landrum standing by the cafeteria entrance. He was scanning the room like he was looking for someone specific. When his eyes landed on me, he smiled and waved like everything was totally normal. He started walking toward me and I froze. He asked how I was doing and if I was handling everything okay after the scary incident with Mr. Torres bursting into our class. His voice was all concerned and caring, like he was everyone's favorite counselor. But something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. I mumbled something about being fine and tried to move past him toward my table. Janice appeared next to me and grabbed my arm, pulling me away. We walked quickly to an empty table on the other side of the cafeteria. Janice leaned in close and whispered that Mr. Landrum had been asking her homeroom teacher about my schedule this morning. He'd told the teacher he wanted to check in on students who were affected by the Torres incident and make sure they had the support they needed. But Janice said the way he asked was weird, like he specifically wanted to know where I'd be and when. We both realized at the same time that he might suspect we were investigating. Maybe he'd seen us talking to Lorelei. Maybe someone had mentioned us asking questions. Whatever the reason, he was clearly paying attention to us now. That made our meeting with Kai feel even more urgent and important. After school, Janice and I drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over where nobody from our school would recognize us. We got there early and sat in a corner booth near the back, both of us jumpy and nervous. Kai walked in right at 3:30 and looked around until he spotted us. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with messy dark hair and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He slid into the booth across from us and pulled out a notebook and pen. He thanked us for reaching out and said he appreciated our courage in coming forward. Then he started asking questions. He wanted to know exactly how we found the social media photos. He wanted details about when we saw Rosa's car outside my house. He asked about Lorelei's observations and whether she'd be willing to talk to him directly. He asked tough questions too, like how we knew the photos weren't just coincidence and whether we'd considered that we might be seeing patterns that weren't really there. I could tell he was testing us, making sure we weren't just kids with overactive imaginations. Janice and I took turns walking him through everything we'd found, showing him the evidence on my phone and explaining our reasoning. After about 40 minutes, Kai sat back and nodded slowly. He said our evidence was compelling, but we needed to understand something important. Investigating a potential predator was dangerous work, especially for teenagers who didn't have any legal protection. If Mr. Landrum really did hurt Rosa, then he was capable of hurting other people who got in his way. He asked if our parents knew what we were doing. When we admitted they didn't, he frowned and said that made him uncomfortable. But he also said he believed us and he was going to look into this further. Kai pulled out his laptop and opened some kind of professional database that journalists use. He typed in the license plate number from my doorbell cam and waited while the system searched. A few seconds later, a record popped up on his screen. He turned the laptop so we could see. The car was definitely registered to Rosa Torres at her home address. Kai explained that this was significant because it meant either Rosa was alive somewhere and driving her own car, or someone else had access to her vehicle. Both possibilities completely contradicted the police theory that Mr. Torres killed Rosa in their home. If she died in the house, how did her car end up driving around town days later? Kai said he was going to file public records requests for any prior complaints about Mr. Landrum at the school or at his previous jobs. He also said he'd look into the timeline of Rosa's disappearance more carefully, checking whether the police had actually verified Mr. Landrum's alibi for the day she went missing. He closed his laptop and warned us again to be extremely careful. He said we should stop actively investigating and let him handle it from here. He gave us his cell phone number and told us to call him immediately if anything weird happened or if we felt unsafe. We left the coffee shop and walked toward my car in the parking lot. Janice was telling me she felt relieved that an actual adult was taking us seriously when she suddenly stopped walking. She grabbed my arm hard and pointed. 3 spaces down from my car, mister. Landrum's silver sedan was parked. I recognized it immediately because it had a specific dent in the front bumper and a school parking sticker on the windshield. Kai must have noticed our reaction because he came up behind us and asked what was wrong. When we pointed out Mr. Landrum's car, his whole expression changed. He told us to get in my car right now and drive straight home. He said he'd stay here and watch to see if Mr. Landrum followed us. My hands were shaking, so badly I could barely get my key in the ignition. I dropped my keys twice before finally getting the car started. Janice kept turning around in her seat to watch the rearview mirror as we pulled out of the parking lot. She was breathing fast, and I could tell she was as scared as I was. How did Mr. Landrum know we were here? Had he followed us from the school? Was he watching us right now from somewhere in the coffee shop or the parking lot? I drove carefully, checking my mirrors constantly, taking random turns to make sure nobody was following us. By the time we got back to my neighborhood, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so tight. About an hour after we got to my house, my phone buzzed with a text from Kai. He said Mr. Landrum had left the coffee shop parking lot about 20 minutes after we did, but he hadn't followed us. Kai had watched him get in his car and drive in the opposite direction from where we'd gone. But the fact that Mr. Landrum had been there at all confirmed that he was monitoring our activities somehow. Kai texted that we needed to be extremely careful about where we went and who we talked to. He also said he was going to speed up his investigation because our safety was now a real concern. He told us not to go anywhere alone and to let him know immediately if we saw Mr. Landrum's car again. I showed the text to Janice and we both just sat there on my bed, not saying anything for a while. The reality of what we were doing had suddenly become very real and very scary. That night around 9, my phone rang with Janice's number. When I answered, she was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. She kept apologizing over and over. Finally, she calmed down enough to explain that her mom had found out about our investigation. Janice had left some of our notes on her desk, and her mom had seen them when she went in to put away laundry. Her mom had completely lost it, yelling about how we'd been putting ourselves in danger and investigating a potential murderer. She'd forbidden Janice from any further involvement with the case. She'd even threatened to call my parents and tell them everything if we didn't stop immediately. Janice said her mom was scared and angry, and she understood why, but she felt terrible about abandoning Mr. Torres when he needed help. She kept saying we were just kids, and we shouldn't be going up against someone who might be a killer. I told her I understood, and that her mom was right to be worried. We were just high school students. We'd already done more than most people would have done. Maybe it was time to let Kai handle it from here. Janice sniffled and said she hoped Mr. Torres would be okay. Then she said she had to go because her mom was calling her downstairs. After we hung up, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling scared and alone, and wondering if we'd made a huge mistake by getting involved in this at all. The next day at the school felt like walking through a nightmare where everyone could see me, but nobody would talk to me. I kept my head down in the hallways and avoided making eye contact with anyone because I knew Janice wouldn't be meeting me between classes or sitting with me at lunch. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see Mr. Landrum standing there watching me, and twice I actually did see him in the hallway talking to students like nothing was wrong. He smiled at me once when we passed each other near the main office, and I felt my stomach turn over because his smile looked so normal and friendly, like he was everyone's favorite counselor instead of someone who might have kidnapped Rosa. During study hall, I pulled out my phone and started searching for cases where school employees were accused of stalking or worse, and the results made me feel sick. There were so many stories about teachers and counselors and coaches who had warning signs that nobody paid attention to until it was too late. I found an article about a guidance counselor in another state who stalked a parent for 2 years before attacking her in a parking lot, and the school had received 3 complaints about his behavior but dismissed them all as misunderstandings. I screenshot that article and 5 others about institutional protection of predators, saving them to show Kai later because they proved we weren't crazy for thinking the school might cover for Mr. Landrum. My phone buzzed with a text from Kai asking me to meet him at the public library after school because he'd received responses to his records requests. I texted back that I'd be there and spent the rest of study hall watching the clock and trying not to think about how alone I felt without Janice to talk to. After school, I drove to the public library and found Kai sitting at a corner table with a folder full of papers spread out in front of him. He waved me over and kept his voice low as he showed me a complaint filed 2 years ago by a parent who said, Mr. Landrum made her uncomfortable during a college planning meeting. The complaint was just 2 pages long, but reading it made my hands shake because the parent described exactly the kind of behavior Janice had told me about with her mom. Mr. Landrum had asked too many personal questions about the mom's work schedule and whether she was dating anyone, and he'd offered to meet her for coffee to discuss her daughter's college prospects, even though the daughter already had straight A's and didn't need extra help. The complaint was marked resolved through counseling with no further action taken, and there was a note at the bottom saying the parent had withdrawn her daughter from the school shortly after filing it. Kai pointed to that note and said it was suspicious that someone would pull their kid out of school right after complaining about a counselor, like maybe they didn't feel safe having their daughter there anymore. We spent the next 20 minutes trying to find contact information for the parent who filed the complaint, but her social media accounts were locked down completely and her phone number was unlisted. I suggested we try searching for the daughter's name to see if she had any public accounts, but Kai said he'd already tried that and found nothing. He leaned back in his chair and said this pattern of someone disappearing after complaining about Mr. Landrum was really suspicious, and he was going to keep digging into Mr. Landrum's employment history at previous schools to see if there were more complaints that got buried. I felt sick thinking about how many people might have tried to warn others about him over the years, and how many times those warnings were ignored because he seemed so nice and professional on the surface. The next morning, I was sitting in my first period class when the intercom crackled and the secretary's voice said my name, asking me to report to the assistant principal's office. My stomach dropped because I knew this wasn't going to be good, and sure enough, when I walked into his office, the assistant principal was sitting behind his desk with his arms crossed and a really annoyed expression on his face. He asked me to close the door and sit down, then he asked why I'd been spreading rumors about Mr. Landrum. I tried to explain that I wasn't spreading rumors, I was just asking questions about Rose's disappearance, but he cut me off and said someone had told the administration that I'd been investigating the case and questioning Mr. Landrum's involvement. He leaned forward and said that making false accusations against staff members could result in suspension and that I should focus on my schoolwork instead of playing detective. His voice was cold and angry, in a way that made it clear he thought I was causing trouble for no reason, and he never once asked why I had concerns about Mr. Landrum or what evidence I'd found. I left the assistant principal's office shaking with anger and fear because I realized Mr. Landrum must have reported my questions to the administration. The school was protecting him just like they'd protected him 2 years ago when that parent complained, and nobody in charge seemed to care that a woman was missing and the wrong man might be in jail. I pulled out my phone and texted Kai about what just happened, and he responded right away saying this administrative pushback actually strengthened our case because it showed a pattern of institutional protection. He said to document everything the assistant principal said and to be careful about who I talked to at the school because it was clear the administration was watching me now. During lunch, I was walking to my locker when the school officer who'd helped during Mr. Torres's breakdown pulled me aside in the hallway. He glanced around to make sure nobody was listening, then he quietly told me that he wasn't supposed to say anything. But if I had real concerns about staff members, I should use the anonymous tip line that went directly to the district office instead of talking to the school administrators. He didn't say Mr. Landrum's name, but his meaningful look told me he knew exactly what I was investigating, and I got the feeling he maybe believed me even if nobody else at the school did. That afternoon, I sat at my desk at home and carefully filled out the anonymous tip form on the district website. I outlined the pattern of Mr. Landrum's behavior toward Rosa, attached the screenshots of his social media photos with her in the background, described the prior complaint from 2 years ago, and explained how Rosa's car had appeared near my house after we started investigating. I included everything Lorelei had told us about Mr. Landrum's constant presence during Rosa's volunteer shifts and the timeline showing he had regular access to her without it seeming suspicious. The form took me almost an hour to complete because I wanted to make sure I included every detail and made it sound credible instead of like some kid making stuff up. When I finally hit submit, a confirmation message popped up saying tips are reviewed within 48 hours, so now all I could do was wait and hope someone at the district office would take it seriously. Late that night, my phone lit up with a text from Janice saying her mom had read more about the case and was starting to believe we might be right about Mr. Landrum. She said her mom had been thinking about it all day and suddenly remembered that Mr. Landrum had been overly friendly at a parent-teacher conference last year, asking personal questions about her work schedule and whether she was dating anyone. Her mom had dismissed it at the time as awkward small talk, but now she was reconsidering his motives and feeling creeped out that she'd almost agreed to meet with him one-on-one. Janice said her mom was scared, but also felt guilty for shutting down our investigation, and she wanted to know if there was anything she could do to help from a distance without putting Janice in danger. I texted back that she should write down everything she remembered about Mr. Landrum's behavior and send it to Kai, because every detail helped build the case against him. The next day at the school felt completely different because I noticed other students whispering and pointing at me in the hallways. Someone had started a rumor that I was defending Mr. Torres because I was related to him or being paid by his lawyer, and people were calling me a murder apologist on social media. I pulled out my phone between classes and saw that someone had posted about me in a school gossip group, saying I was harassing Mr. Landrum and trying to get an innocent man fired to help a killer go free. The comments were brutal, with people I'd known since middle school calling me crazy and attention-seeking and saying I should be expelled for making false accusations. I deleted all my social media apps right there in the hallway because I couldn't handle reading any more of it, and I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on class while feeling completely crushed by the isolation. After school, Kai called me with news that made everything feel slightly less hopeless. He said he'd found Mr. Landrum's employment records from a previous school district, and it turned out Mr. Landrum had worked at a middle school in another state for 3 years before moving here. The weird part was that he'd left that position really suddenly, with no forwarding information in his file, which Kai said was unusual for someone in education because schools normally want detailed records when hiring counselors. Kai was trying to contact administrators from that school to find out why Mr. Landrum left so abruptly, and he said if there was another complaint or incident in his past, it would prove this was a pattern of behavior and not just a coincidence. 2 days passed before my phone rang with Kai's number. He said he'd finally gotten through to someone from that other school where Mr. Landrum worked before coming here. A retired principal agreed to talk after Kai mentioned Rosa's name. The woman went quiet for almost a full minute when Kai brought up the disappearance. She told him about a mom who filed a complaint years ago saying Mr. Landrum made her uncomfortable during meetings about her daughter's grades. The mom said he kept asking personal questions about her schedule and whether she lived alone. The school handled everything quietly because Mr. Landrum agreed to resign if they gave him a good reference for his next job. The district didn't want a lawsuit, so they let him leave with a clean record and never told anyone what really happened. I felt sick hearing this because Rosa might still be here if someone had actually done something back then instead of just moving the problem somewhere else. Kai explained he was writing an article about Mr. Landrum's job history and the weird things about Rosa's case, but he had to be really careful about what he said so Mr. Landrum couldn't sue him. He promised not to use my name or Janice's name anywhere in the article. We'd just be listed as anonymous sources who brought concerns to his attention. I asked when the article would come out, and he said probably that same night, because every day that passed was another day Mr. Landrum could destroy evidence or hurt someone else. The article went live around 8 o'clock that evening. The headline read, "Questions Remain in Torres Case, Guidance Counselors Passed Under Scrutiny." Kai didn't flat out say Mr. Landrum kidnapped Rosa, but he laid out all the facts in a way that made readers ask their own questions. He wrote about the complaint at the previous school and how Mr. Landrum left suddenly. He mentioned Rosa volunteered at our school library during Mr. Landrum's free periods. He included the detail about her car being spotted around town after she supposedly died. Within an hour, the article had been shared hundreds of times on social media. The comment section filled up with people arguing about whether the cops grabbed the wrong guy. Some people said we should trust the police investigation, but others pointed out how much blood evidence can be planted and how Mr. Torres seemed genuinely confused about what happened in his own house. I barely slept that night, checking my phone every few minutes to see the article spread further. The next morning at the school felt completely different from the day before. Mr. Landrum wasn't there. Kids whispered in the hallways that he'd been put on leave while the district looked into some personnel issues. During homeroom, the assistant principal came on the intercom sounding really uncomfortable. He said the district was reviewing certain matters, and if any student had concerns about staff members, they should call the anonymous tip line. He didn't say Mr. Landrum's name, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. I felt this huge wave of relief that finally someone with actual authority was taking this seriously instead of just brushing it off. But I also felt scared about what Mr. Landrum might do now that he knew people were onto him, and he was running out of options. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Kai. He said the police reopened their investigation into Rosa's disappearance based on the new information about Mr. Landrum's history. They were trying to figure out where he was the day Rosa went missing, and they wanted to find her car so they could check it for fingerprints and other evidence. I texted back that I felt glad someone was finally looking at the right person, but also nervous because we'd basically painted a target on ourselves by helping expose him. Kai responded that I should be extra careful and pay attention to my surroundings because cornered predators are the most dangerous kind. I tried to follow his advice, but it's hard to stay alert all the time when you're just trying to get through regular school stuff. That night I went to bed around 11 and didn't think to check the doorbell camera before turning off my light. The next morning my dad came into my room holding a piece of paper and looking really pale. He asked if I knew anything about this. The paper had been wedged into our front door frame sometime around midnight according to the camera footage. Someone had printed out a message in plain black text that said, "Stop asking questions or you'll disappear too," with no signature or other identifying marks. My parents called the police immediately, and I had to sit down with both of them and explain everything I'd been doing for the past few weeks. They were furious that I'd been investigating a potential killer without telling them. My mom kept saying I could have been hurt or worse. My dad wanted to know why I thought it was my job to solve crimes instead of letting adults handle it. I tried to explain that the adults weren't handling it, and an innocent man was sitting in jail while the real bad guy walked around free, but they were too scared and angry to really listen. 2 officers showed up to collect the note as evidence and take our statements. They said they'd increase patrols in our neighborhood, but one of them lectured me about interfering with police work. The detective who was handling Rosa's case seemed really annoyed that some high school kid had been playing detective and possibly messing up their investigation. He told me in this condescending voice that I should leave police work to professionals who actually know what they're doing. He said my amateur investigating could end up getting evidence thrown out of court or compromising their whole case. I wanted to point out that their case against Mr. Torres was total garbage and only fell apart because Janice and I actually paid attention, but I kept my mouth shut because arguing with cops seemed like a bad idea. That evening, Janice and her mom came over for a big meeting with my parents about safety and what we should do next. Janice's mom apologized for shutting down our concerns earlier and said she felt terrible about not believing us sooner. She admitted she was really scared about what we'd uncovered and worried about what might happen to Janice if Mr. Landrum decided to come after people who helped expose him. All four parents agreed that we needed to stop actively investigating and let the police handle things from here on out. But they also said they were proud of us for finding real evidence that the police should have found themselves. My mom made Janice and me promise to tell them immediately if anything else weird happened or if we felt unsafe at any point. The next week dragged by so slowly it felt like time had stopped completely. Every day at the school, people whispered about Mr. Landrum and whether he'd actually done something to Rosa. Kai kept texting me updates about what he was hearing through his sources at the police department. Apparently, Mr. Landrum hired a lawyer right away and refused to answer any questions without his attorney present. The police got a warrant to search his house and car, but Kai said they hadn't announced finding anything major yet. I spent most of my free time refreshing news sites and checking social media to see if there were any breaks in the case. Janice texted me constantly asking if I'd heard anything new. We were both going crazy waiting for something to happen. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang and Kai's name popped up on the screen. I answered and he said he had major news that was about to break publicly. The police found Rosa's car abandoned in a grocery store parking lot 3 towns away from where we lived. Someone had wiped down all the surfaces so there weren't any fingerprints left behind. But they found a receipt stuffed in the glove compartment from a hardware store, and the date on it was the day right after Rosa disappeared. Kai said the police pulled security footage from that hardware store, and it showed Mr. Landrum buying cleaning supplies and a large tarp. I felt this weird mix of excitement that we'd been right all along, and horror at what those supplies probably meant about what happened to Rosa. I felt sick thinking about what those supplies probably meant for Rosa. The police finding that hardware store receipt changed everything because it put Mr. Landrum in Rosa's car the day after she vanished, buying exactly the kind of stuff you'd need to clean up a crime scene. Kai texted me updates over the next few days as the police dug deeper into Mr. Landrum's activities. They got a warrant for his phone records and computer, looking for GPS data that might show where he drove Rosa's car. The detective who'd been so annoyed with me before suddenly seemed a lot more interested in the evidence we'd found. Kai said the DA was seriously thinking about charging Mr. Landrum while they reviewed whether to keep going after Mr. Torres. I checked my phone constantly between classes, waiting for news about what they'd discover. Janice texted asking if I'd heard anything, and I could tell she was as anxious as me about what would happen next. The whole school felt weird because everyone knew something big was happening with the case, but nobody had official information yet. Kids whispered in the hallways about whether they'd arrested the wrong person, and I heard some students saying maybe we should have listened to Mr. Torres from the beginning. The school board called an emergency meeting 3 days after the police found Rosa's car. Kai attended to cover it for his newspaper, and he texted me live updates during the meeting. The board voted to fire Mr. Landrum right away, based on the old complaints and the criminal investigation happening now. Several parents spoke during the public comment part about how their kids had mentioned Mr. Landrum's weird behavior, but they didn't think it was important at the time. One mom stood up and said her daughter told her last year that Mr. Landrum kept asking about their family vacation plans and when their house would be empty. Another parent described how Mr. Landrum offered to give her son a ride home from the school multiple times, even though the kid had a car. Kai said the board members looked shocked as parent after parent shared stories they dismissed as harmless at the time. The superintendent promised a full review of how staff complaints get handled and said they'd be bringing in outside investigators to look at their procedures. I felt angry listening to Kai's updates because all these warning signs had been there for years, but nobody put them together until Rosa disappeared. Lorelei contacted me through Kai 2 days later with something else she'd found. She'd been going through the library's old checkout records trying to remember anything unusual about Mr. Landrum's visits. She discovered he'd checked out a book about wilderness survival and another one about getting rid of evidence about 6 weeks before Rosa went missing. Lorelei said she felt terrible that she'd processed those checkouts without thinking anything seemed wrong, but now the book titles looked really scary when you thought about what happened to Rosa. She sent Kai screenshots of the checkout records showing the dates and the specific books Mr. Landrum had borrowed. One book was called Surviving Off the Grid, and the other was Forensic Investigation Methods. Kai forwarded the screenshots to me and said this was exactly the kind of planning behavior that would help prove Mr. Landrum thought about hurting Rosa ahead of time. I stared at those book titles on my phone and realized Mr. Landrum had been preparing for months, maybe even longer. He wasn't acting on some sudden impulse. He'd carefully planned how to make Rosa disappear without getting caught. The police used Lorelei's library records to get another warrant for Mr. Landrum's credit card and bank statements. Kai explained they were building what he called a circumstantial case because they still didn't have Rosa's body. Every piece of evidence helped show that Mr. Landrum had the intent and opportunity to hurt Rosa. The police started going through months of Mr. Landrum's financial records looking for anything that might show where he could have taken her. They found purchases at outdoor supply stores for camping gear, a shovel, heavy-duty garbage bags, and bleach. His credit card showed gas station purchases in towns 40 miles away from where we lived, places he had no reason to visit for work or personal business. Kai said the police were mapping out all these locations to figure out where Mr. Landrum might have gone with Rosa. I tried to focus on schoolwork, but kept thinking about those wilderness areas and what the police might find when they searched them. 2 weeks after Kai's article came out, the police made a big announcement. They'd found a storage unit rented by Mr. Landrum under a fake name at a facility outside town. The police were getting a warrant to search it, and Kai texted me saying this could be the moment that either proved or cleared Mr. Landrum's involvement. I sat through my classes that day, barely paying attention to anything the teachers said. My mind kept going back to that storage unit and what might be inside it. Janice passed me a note during English asking if I'd heard the news, and I nodded but couldn't focus on the words in front of me. After school, I went straight home and turned on the news, watching for any updates about the storage unit search. My parents asked what I was so worried about, and I explained how important this search could be for proving what really happened to Rosa. We ate dinner in front of the TV waiting for breaking news, but nothing came through that evening. The next morning before school started, Kai called me with huge news. The police had searched the storage unit overnight and found Rosa's purse, her phone with the SIM card taken out, and the master key that went missing from Mr. Torres's supply closet. They also discovered a burner phone with text messages to Rosa's number, trying to get her to meet Mr. Landrum for urgent school business on the day she disappeared. Kai said this evidence completely destroyed the police theory that Mr. Torres killed Rosa in their home. The texts showed Mr. Landrum had been trying to lure Rosa to meet him, and the master key proved he had access to plant evidence in Mr. Torres's house. I felt this rush of relief that we'd been right all along, mixed with anger that the police had been so sure Mr. Torres was guilty. Kai said he was writing another article about the storage unit discovery and how it changed everything about the case. I thanked him for keeping me updated and headed to the school feeling like maybe justice would finally happen for Rosa and Mr. Torres. Mr. Landrum got arrested that same evening. The news showed police leading him out of his house in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions at him. He was charged with kidnapping, evidence tampering, and stalking. The news coverage switched completely from calling it the janitor killer case to talking about the trusted counselor's shocking betrayal. I watched the coverage with my parents feeling weird about being right because we still didn't know where Rosa was or if she was even alive. My mom hugged me and said she was proud I'd kept asking questions even when adults told me to stop. My dad looked worried and asked if I felt safe at the school now that Mr. Landrum was in jail. I said I felt better knowing he couldn't hurt anyone else, but the whole thing still felt unfinished without knowing what happened to Rosa. The news showed Mr. Torres's lawyer making a statement about how this arrest proved his client's innocence, and I hoped Mr. Torres would be released soon. The DA held a press conference the next afternoon, announcing they were dropping all charges against Mr. Torres. The new evidence pointing to Mr. Landrum made it clear they'd arrested the wrong person. Mr. Torres walked out of jail that same afternoon, and the news cameras captured him leaving the building. He looked destroyed rather than happy, his face tired and his shoulders slumped like the weight of everything was crushing him. Rosa was still missing, and he'd spent weeks in jail accused of killing her while the real person responsible walked free. Kai got a brief interview with Mr. Torres outside the jail, and Mr. Torres thanked the students who believed him without saying our names. His voice broke when he talked about Rosa, saying he just wanted to find her and bring her home. I watched the interview feeling sad for him because even though he was free now, his life was completely wrecked and his wife was still gone. Monday at the school felt totally different. Some kids came up to me between classes to apologize for calling me a murder apologist and saying mean things on social media. Others looked embarrassed and avoided eye contact, probably feeling bad about how quickly they'd believed Mr. Torres was guilty. Janice and I suddenly got treated like heroes, which felt strange because we'd just asked questions that adults should have been asking from the start. Kids wanted to know how we figured it out and what made us suspicious of Mr. Landrum. I tried to explain that we just paid attention to things that didn't make sense, but people acted like we'd done something amazing instead of basic detective work. During morning announcements, the principal talked about the importance of speaking up when something doesn't seem right and thanked unnamed students for their courage. Janice grabbed my hand under our desks and squeezed it, and I knew we were both thinking about Rosa and hoping the police would find her soon. Kai published another article that week focusing on how badly the system had failed. He interviewed the parent who'd filed the original complaint about Mr. Landrum years ago, and she talked about feeling dismissed when the school did nothing. She described how the assistant principal had made her feel like she was overreacting and causing problems by questioning a beloved teacher. The article explained how rushing to judge Mr. Torres and ignoring warning signs about Mr. Landrum almost let a dangerous person stay free while an innocent man went to prison. Kai wrote about institutional failures and how schools need better ways to handle staff misconduct complaints. His article got shared thousands of times online and started conversations about how schools protect their reputation instead of protecting students and families. I read the comments and saw people sharing similar stories about being ignored when they reported concerns about teachers or staff members. The whole thing made me realize how many people get hurt because adults don't want to believe someone they trust could do something bad. The police investigation moved fast after that. The detective in charge of Rosa's case requested Mr. Landrum's phone records, and within days they had cell tower data showing everywhere he went in the week after Rosa disappeared. I watched the news coverage obsessively, seeing maps with red dots marking locations Mr. Landrum visited, most of them remote areas outside town where nobody would think to look. The police organized search teams to comb those areas, and the response from the community was huge. Hundreds of volunteers showed up at the high school parking lot on Saturday morning, and the news cameras captured people in orange vests, spreading out across fields and woods looking for any sign of Rosa. I wanted to go, but my parents said absolutely not after everything that happened. Janice texted me photos from her window of all the search vehicles driving past her house heading toward the trails. The whole town seemed focused on finding Rosa and bringing her home. 3 days into the search, a volunteer found something near a hiking trail about 40 miles from town. The news broke during dinner, and I pulled up the live coverage on my phone. Rosa's volunteer library badge and her distinctive handmade scarf were discovered near the trailhead, and the police were bringing in cadaver dogs and special equipment to search the area more carefully. My stomach twisted watching the footage because finding her belongings meant she was probably close by. The news anchor explained they were using ground-penetrating radar to scan the area, and I kept refreshing the news sites every few minutes hoping for updates. Janice called me that night, and we talked for an hour about how scared we were that they would find Rosa, but also how much we wanted them to find her, so Mr. Torres could have some kind of closure. The waiting was terrible because every hour that passed felt like forever. Mr. Torres showed up at the search site on the 4th day, despite the police telling him to let them handle it. The news cameras captured him walking the trails calling Rosa's name, and his face looked destroyed. He kept stopping to look at the ground like he might spot something the searchers missed, and volunteers had to gently guide him away from areas they were actively searching. Watching him on the news made me cry because I thought about how close he came to being convicted of murdering the person he loved most in the world. The police had been so sure he did it, and if we hadn't asked questions, he might be in prison right now while the real killer walked free. Janice and I both wanted to join the searches, but our parents refused because the terrain was dangerous, and they said we'd been through enough stress. My mom kept saying we were just kids and we'd already done more than anyone could expect. I felt useless sitting at home watching the news when I wanted to be out there helping look for Rosa. On the 5th day of searching, the police found a disturbed area of earth about a mile from where Rosa's scarf was discovered. The news showed police tape blocking off the area and investigators carefully digging while the cameras stayed back. I watched the live coverage with my parents, and nobody said anything when they brought out the first evidence bags. The official announcement came that evening. They found Rosa's body buried in a shallow grave, and the medical examiner said she died from a bad hit to the head. The timeline suggested she was killed shortly after she disappeared, which meant she'd been gone for weeks before anyone found her. My dad turned off the TV, and my mom hugged me while I cried, because even though we knew Rosa was probably dead, having it confirmed felt different. She was a real person who volunteered at the library and made tamales for fundraisers, and now she was gone because some creep couldn't handle rejection. The news of Rosa's death hit everyone hard. The school held a memorial service in the gym, and it seemed like the whole town showed up. Students and teachers took turns sharing memories of Rosa's kindness and her volunteer work. People talked about how she always remembered everyone's names and how she helped struggling readers without making them feel bad about it. Mr. Torres sat in the front row looking completely broken, and several people approached him after to apologize for believing he was guilty. I sat in the back with Janice, and we both cried for a woman we barely knew, but fought so hard to find justice for. Lorelai spoke about working with Rosa at the library, and her voice broke when she described how Rosa would stay late to help kids with homework. The whole service felt heavy and sad, because Rosa should have been there volunteering instead of being remembered. The DA filed charges against Mr. Landrum 2 days later. First-degree murder based on all the physical evidence and the pattern of stalking behavior. His lawyer tried arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, but the combination of Rosa's belongings in his storage unit, his phone records showing he was near where her body was found, and the hardware store purchases of cleaning supplies and a tarp created a timeline that was pretty damning. Kai explained to me over text that the trial would likely happen next year because these cases take time to prepare. He said Mr. Torres would need that time to grieve and get ready for the difficult process of testifying about Rosa and their life together. I felt relieved that Landrum was charged, but also anxious about having to testify eventually. Kai said we'd probably be called as witnesses since we found crucial evidence. The school board launched a big investigation into how Mr. Landrum's previous complaints were handled and why he was able to keep working despite all the red flags. They hired an outside company to review all the personnel policies and complaint procedures, which seemed like something they should have done years ago. Lorelai contacted me and Janice through our parents, asking if we'd be willing to serve on a committee developing new safety protocols for volunteer programs. She said they wanted student perspectives on what went wrong and how to fix it. My parents talked to me about whether I felt comfortable participating, and I said yes, because I wanted to help prevent this from happening to anyone else. Janice agreed too, and we had our first committee meeting the following week at the district office. During that first meeting, we shared how dismissed we felt when we tried to report our concerns to the assistant principal, and how the anonymous tip line was the only way to get taken seriously. The committee members seemed genuinely shocked by our stories. One of the board members kept shaking her head and saying she couldn't believe students had to fight so hard to be heard. We explained how Mr. Landrum was so well liked that nobody wanted to believe he could do something bad, and how that protection almost cost Mr. Torres everything. Lorelai backed us up with her observations about how the administration shut down her concerns about Landrum's behavior around Rosa. The committee took tons of notes and promised to make real changes to prevent future failures. It felt good to be listened to by adults who actually cared about fixing the problems instead of protecting the school's reputation. Over the next month, the committee met 3 times and developed new policies. Background checks would happen every 2 years instead of just at hiring. All staff misconduct complaints had to be reported to the district office instead of being handled internally by school administrators. They created a new student safety advocate position to handle concerns about staff members, so students had someone to talk to besides the principal. The school board voted to implement all the changes, and several other districts in the state reached out to learn about the new protocols. Kai wrote another article about the policy changes and how student voices helped create them. Reading that article made me feel like something good came out of Rosa's tragedy, even though nothing could bring her back. Mr. Torres returned to work at the school after taking a leave of absence, and students treated him with a weird mix of sympathy and awkwardness. Nobody knew what to say to someone who'd been through what he experienced. I saw him in the hallway one day pushing his cleaning cart, and he stopped when he saw me. His eyes filled with tears, and he said Rosa would be proud that students fought for the truth. I didn't know what to say except that I was sorry we couldn't find her in time, and my voice cracked saying it. He hugged me briefly and said we gave him his life back, and that mattered more than we knew. Then he walked away pushing his cart, and I stood there crying in the empty hallway thinking about how unfair everything was. A few weeks later, Kai invited me and Janice to attend a journalism awards ceremony at the state capitol, where he was receiving recognition for his investigative reporting on Rosa's case. We sat in the audience with our parents watching him accept the award from the governor, and when he gave his speech, he specifically mentioned how 2 high school students had the courage to question the official story when everyone else was accepted it without thinking. He said we showed him what real journalism should be about, finding truth even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. After the ceremony, he told us he was donating half the $10,000 prize money to create a scholarship in Rosa's name for students interested in journalism or criminal justice. The scholarship would help kids who wanted to use their voice to fight for people who weren't being heard by the system. It felt good knowing Rosa's death might help future students learn to ask hard questions and stand up for what's right. Janice cried during the whole ceremony, and her mom kept hugging her, which was different from how things used to be between them. Over the next few weeks, Janice told me her relationship with her mom had completely changed because her mom finally took her concerns seriously and respected her judgment about dangerous situations. They started going to therapy together every Thursday to process the trauma of being targeted by Mr. Landrum and all the stress from the investigation. Janice said the therapist helped them talk about how scary it was, knowing a predator was watching them, and how her mom felt guilty for not believing her sooner. During one of our lunch periods, Janice mentioned she was thinking about becoming a lawyer someday, so she could help people who weren't believed by the system. People like Mr. Torres who got arrested for something they didn't do just because the evidence looked bad. I told her she'd be amazing at that because she never gave up even when everyone said we were wrong. My own parents were proud of what we accomplished, but they were also really relieved when life started getting back to normal, and I stopped receiving threatening notes in our doorway. One night, they sat me down at the kitchen table for a serious conversation about the difference between standing up for what's right and putting myself in danger without telling them first. My dad said he understood why I investigated, but he wished I'd come to them earlier so they could have helped protect me from Mr. Landrum's threats. I promised that if I ever suspected something wrong again, I would talk to them right away instead of trying to handle everything myself. We all agreed that sometimes doing the right thing is scary and uncomfortable, but staying silent when you know something is wrong can be even more dangerous for everyone involved. About a month after Mr. Landrum's arrest, the DA's office called our house to tell me and Janice we would likely be called as witnesses at his trial to testify about his behavior toward Rosa and the evidence we discovered during our investigation. The trial date was set for 8 months away, which felt like forever. But the DA said murder trials take a long time to prepare because they need to build the strongest possible case. A few days later, Atticus Monroe, the public defender who represented Mr. Torres during his arrest, contacted us through our parents asking if we wanted to meet with him to prepare for the testimony process. My parents drove me to his office downtown, where Janice and her mom were already waiting in a conference room with comfortable chairs and boxes of tissues on the table. Atticus was younger than I expected, maybe in his 30s, and he spent 2 hours explaining exactly what would happen in court and how to handle aggressive cross-examination from Mr. Landrum's defense lawyer. He said the defense would try to make us look like kids playing detective who didn't know what we were doing, but we should just stay calm and tell the truth about what we found and why we believed Mr. Torres was innocent. He practiced asking us tough questions, so we'd be ready for anything the defense threw at us, and by the end of the meeting I felt less scared about testifying, even though I knew it would still be hard. Back at the school over the next few months, I noticed the whole culture had shifted in ways that felt important. Students were more willing to speak up about things that made them uncomfortable, like if a teacher stood too close or asked personal questions that seemed inappropriate. Teachers also seemed more aware of maintaining proper boundaries with students and being careful about how their actions might be perceived. The district filled the new student safety advocate position with a social worker named Miss Anderson, who made a point of being visible in the hallways and cafeteria, so students knew where to find her if they had concerns. One day she stopped me between classes to thank me for helping create awareness of a need the district should have filled years ago. And she said my willingness to speak up probably prevented other students from being targeted by predators who hide behind trusted positions. Around the same time, Kai called to tell me that Mr. Landrum's defense lawyer was trying to negotiate a plea deal to avoid going to trial, probably because they knew the evidence against him was overwhelming. The DA refused to offer anything less than life in prison without parole, because of the aggravating factors of stalking and abuse of authority, and Kai explained that cases involving teachers or counselors who hurt people under their care get treated more seriously by the courts. Mr. Torres gave an interview to the local news, saying he wanted his day in court to make sure everyone understood exactly what Mr. Landrum did to Rosa, and how the system almost let him get away with it by rushing to arrest the wrong person. 3 months before the trial was supposed to start, Mr. Landrum's lawyer filed a motion to suppress some of the evidence we'd found, arguing that the initial search warrants were based on unreliable information from teenage sources who didn't understand proper investigative procedures. The judge scheduled a hearing to consider the motion, and Kai had to testify about how he verified all our evidence independently before taking it to the police. Lorelei also testified about her direct observations of Mr. Landrum's inappropriate behavior around Rosa during her volunteer shifts at the library. I sat in the courtroom gallery with Janice watching the lawyers argue back and forth about whether our tips should be considered credible enough to justify the search warrants. The judge asked tough questions about the timeline and how the police corroborated our information before getting the warrants, and after hearing all the testimony, she denied the motion to suppress. She ruled that our tips were properly investigated and verified by professional journalists and law enforcement before any searches happened, so the evidence could be used at trial. As winter turned to spring and the trial date got closer, I started struggling with serious anxiety about having to testify and relive those scary weeks when we were investigating Mr. Landrum. I had nightmares about him escaping from jail and coming after me, or about freezing up on the witness stand and forgetting everything I needed to say. My new school counselor, a woman who replaced Mr. Landrum and seemed genuinely caring instead of creepy, helped me develop coping strategies for managing the stress. She taught me breathing exercises and ways to ground myself when I felt panic rising, and she assured me that my willingness to speak up even when it was difficult and scary had likely prevented Mr. Landrum from targeting other victims after Rosa. The trial finally began on a cold Monday morning in March, and the courthouse was packed with community members, reporters, and Rosa's family who had traveled from out of state to attend. Janice and I sat in the witness waiting room feeling nervous about our upcoming testimony, but determined to tell the truth clearly and calmly, no matter how aggressive the defense lawyer got during cross-examination. Atticus walked past carrying thick files of evidence that we had helped uncover months ago, and he gave us a reassuring nod that made me feel slightly less terrified about taking the stand. My testimony ended up lasting 3 hours spread over 2 days, as the prosecutor walked me through the entire timeline of our investigation step by step. I explained how we found the social media photos with Rosa in the background, how her car appeared outside my house after we started investigating, and why we believed Mr. Torres was framed for a crime he didn't commit. Mr. Landrum's defense lawyer tried hard to make me seem like just a kid playing detective who didn't understand real evidence, but I stayed calm and explained that we simply asked questions and documented what we found instead of accepting the official story without thinking. The prosecutor showed the jury the doorbell camera footage of Rosa's car speeding away from my house and the threatening note that was left on our doorstep, and I watched several jurors look disturbed as they realized how far Mr. Landrum had gone to try silencing us when we got too close to the truth. Janice took the stand the next day and told the jury about how Mr. Landrum kept asking to meet her mom, even though Janice had perfect grades. She explained how he showed up at her mom's yoga class and always wanted to know their schedule, and the jury looked disturbed when she described feeling scared to be alone with him. Lorelei testified after lunch about Mr. Landrum signing into the library 30 times during Rosa's volunteer shifts. always finding reasons to be near her, even when Rosa clearly wanted space. She showed the jury the sign-in sheets and photos of Mr. Landrum hovering around Rosa, and several jurors took notes while she talked. Mr. Torres was the last witness, and he broke down crying on the stand when he described coming home to find blood everywhere and his wife's things missing. He talked about the master key Rosa had playfully stolen from him the week before she disappeared, the same key they found in Mr. Landrum's storage unit, and how he knew immediately someone had set him up. The prosecutor spent 3 hours walking the jury through every piece of evidence showing how Mr. Landrum stalked Rosa for years, stole the master key to stage the crime scene, and killed her when she was rejected him. The jury left to think about their decision around 2 in the afternoon, and I sat with Janice in the hallway feeling sick with nerves. 6 hours passed before the bailiff called us back into the courtroom, and my heart was racing. So fast I thought I might throw up. The jury foreman stood up and said guilty on every single charge, including first-degree murder and Mr. Torres collapsed in his chair sobbing while Rosa's family hugged each other and cried. Rosa's sister read a statement about how much they missed Rosa and how her death left a hole in their family that would never heal, and I had to wipe tears off my face listening to her talk. The judge looked at Mr. Landrum and sentenced him to life in prison without any chance of getting out, and as the officers led him away in handcuffs, I felt this huge sense of relief that he would never hurt anyone else. Janice and I walked out of the courthouse together into bright sunshine, and she grabbed my arm and said she was proud of us for not giving up, even when everyone told us we were wrong. Sometimes the truth is worth fighting for even when it's scary, and I knew Rosa would be happy that we helped make sure the right person paid for what he did to her.